The giant cowboy waited for his mail-order bride. Then a woman even bigger than him stepped out. The dusty street falls silent. The crowd laughs, the church bell tolls, and even the deputy can't believe his eyes. A man known as the largest cowboy in the territory has just been matched with someone taller, stronger, and prouder than him. But this isn't just a strange meeting at the train station. Behind her calm eyes hides a debt she never made, and a ruthless rancher is ready to tear them apart. The railroad wants her bound in service, the law holds a writ stamped in iron, and the whispers of the town threaten to shame them both. Yet when two giants of flesh and faith stand together, no one can predict what will happen. Will the cowboy's courage and the bride's hidden strength be enough to fight off greed, betrayal, and the weight of the frontier? Or will their love be broken before it even begins? Before we begin, drop a hello in the comments. Share your corner of the world and how you're feeling today. It's a beautiful thing to witness how stories can connect us across oceans, languages, and lives. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Trinidad's dusty rail platform as Leo McGraw stood beside Mia Dalton, his heart thundering louder than the cooling steam engine behind them. The crowd's laughter had faded to murmurs, but their stares still burned like hot brands against his neck. "Supper would be welcome," Mia said, her voice steady as a mountain stream. She adjusted her grip on the worn carpet bag, the leather creaking under her strong fingers. "Been nothing but train biscuits since Kansas City." Leo nodded, grateful for her easy manner. "The Prairie Rose serves good beef stew." He reached for her bag, but she kept hold of it with a small smile. "I can manage just fine, Mr. McGraw, though I thank you for the courtesy." They walked side by side down the wooden platform, their boots striking the planks in perfect rhythm. Leo noticed how Mia held her head high, meeting the townfolk's gawking with quiet dignity. She was indeed taller than him by a good 2 inches, her shoulders broad beneath her travel-worn dress. But there was a grace to her movements that reminded him of wheat swaying in a summer breeze. As they passed the general store, old Mrs. Henderson dropped her parcel of sugar, mouth agape at the sight of them. Young Tommy Wheeler pointed and tugged at his mother's skirts until she shushed him with a sharp word. But Mia seemed to take no notice, though Leo saw how her jaw tightened just slightly. "Folks ain't used to seeing," Leo started, then faltered, "two people like us together." Mia finished for him. "No, I reckon they ain't. Back home in Kansas, I was always the one standing at the back of church photos, trying to make myself smaller." She glanced at him with understanding in her eyes. "I stopped trying after a while. The good Lord made me this way for his purpose." They reached the Prairie Rose, its whitewashed boards glowing pink in the evening light. Leo held the door, ducking slightly out of habit, though the frame was plenty tall. Inside, the usual dinner crowd fell silent as they entered. Forks stopped halfway to mouths, and conversations died mid-word. The proprietor, Tom Watson, recovered first. "Well now, Bear McGraw, brought yourself some company, I see." His voice carried a hint of surprise, but no mockery, for which Leo was grateful. "Miss Dalton?" Leo said. "Just arrived from Kansas." He led her to a corner table, one he often chose for its sturdy construction and extra legroom. The wooden chair creaked, but held firm as Mia settled herself, arranging her skirts with practiced care. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Watson," Mia called out. "I hear tell you serve the best beef stew west of Dodge City." Her friendly tone seemed to break the spell. The other diners gradually returned to their meals, though Leo caught snippets of whispered conversation, mail-order bride, match made in heaven, or perhaps somewhere else, followed by poorly hidden snickers. Watson brought them 2 bowls of steaming stew and a loaf of fresh bread. "On the house," he said with a kind smile. "Welcome to Trinidad, Miss Dalton." As they ate, Leo found himself stealing glances at Mia's hands, capable hands, marked with the same kind of calluses he carried from years of honest work. She handled her spoon with delicate precision despite their size, and when she broke the bread, she offered him the larger portion without comment. "Your letter mentioned you run cattle," she said between bites. How many head? 243 at last count. Leo replied, relief flooding through him at such a normal topic. Good grazing land, though the creek runs low in August. My father's wheat farm taught me about watching the weather, Mia said, and about trusting in the Lord's timing, even when the clouds don't come. She paused, studying him with those calm eyes. Your letter was honest about everything, Mr. McGraw, including your size. I appreciated that. Leo felt his ears grow warm. Seemed right to warn you. Most ladies. He cleared his throat. Well, most prefer a more ordinary sort of husband. And most men prefer a more delicate sort of wife. Mia countered, but there was no bitterness in her voice. Yet here we are, Mr. McGraw, sitting across from each other like God had a special plan in mind. The evening light through the window caught the silver cross she wore at her throat, making it gleam. Leo remembered the one his mother had given him, tucked safely in his shirt pocket alongside Mia's letters. Perhaps it wasn't just chance that had brought them together. Leo, he said suddenly. Please call me Leo. Or Bear, if you prefer, though that's just what folks took to calling me on account of. He gestured vaguely at himself. A genuine smile spread across Mia's face, transforming it like sunshine breaking through clouds. Leo, then, and I'm Mia. She set down her spoon and folded her hands on the table. Now, since we're being honest, I should tell you that I can shoe a horse, birth a calf, and bake a pie that won medals at the county fair. I read my Bible daily, keep a clean house, and don't suffer fools who judge by appearances. If any of that gives you second thoughts, best to say so now. Leo felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen, like a knot finally coming undone. The only second thought I'm having, Mia, is why I waited so long to send for a bride. Outside, the sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The street lamps were being lit one by one, and the evening stage was rolling in with a clatter of hooves and wheels. Tomorrow there would be more stairs to face, more whispers to ignore. But for now, in the warm light of the prairie rose, two souls who had never quite fit anywhere else were finding that perhaps they fit perfectly together. Through the window, they could see the parish children gathering for evening lessons, their small faces pressed against the glass in unabashed curiosity. One little girl waved shyly, and Mia waved back, her smile gentle and sure. The girl's eyes widened with delight instead of fear, and soon other small hands were waving too. The evening crowd at the Prairie Rose had thinned somewhat, but curious eyes still followed Leo and Mia as they finished their meal. Leo noticed how the cafe girl, Jenny, barely 16 with wheat-colored braids, kept stealing glances at them while she swept between tables. "Look at them giants in boots," Jenny whispered to another server, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "Ain't natural, them being so tall." Leo felt his shoulders tense, but Mia's voice cut through his discomfort. "Excuse me, miss," she called out kindly. "Might we trouble you for some more water?" Jenny approached their table, pitcher trembling slightly in her hands. As she poured, Mia smiled warmly. "That's a lovely ribbon in your hair. Reminds me of the morning glories that grew by our kitchen window back home." The girl's cheeks flushed pink. "Thank you, Mom," she mumbled, some of her fear melting away. Leo watched in amazement as Mia transformed the awkward moment into something gentle. She had a way about her that put others at ease, despite her imposing size. It reminded him of his mother's teachings about meeting unkindness with grace. "I've been working this ranch for 8 years now," Leo found himself saying, breaking a comfortable silence. "Built most of it myself, though the loneliness weighs heavy some days." He paused, surprised by his own openness. "The cattle keep me busy enough, but a man needs more than just work to fill his days." Mia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Father's wheat farm taught me that too. After Mother passed, it was just him and me against those Kansas winds. My size came in handy then, could do the work of any man." She touched the worn Bible in her lap. "But there were nights I'd pray for someone who'd see past these shoulders to the woman beneath." The door burst open, cutting through their moment of connection. Dalton Price strode in, his lean frame casting a long shadow across the floorboards. Behind him, Deputy Sam Kitteridge followed, fingering the badge on his chest with nervous energy. Price's boots clicked against the wood as he approached their table, a folded paper clutched in his gloved hand. "Well, if it ain't the spectacle of the century," he drawled, eyes fixed on Mia. "Miss Dalton, I believe." Leo noticed how Mia's spine straightened, her fingers tightening around her Bible. "I am," she said evenly. "Seems we have some business to discuss." Price slapped the paper down on their table, making the empty bowls rattle. "Your father's farm in Kansas left quite a few debts behind, didn't he? And as his sole heir, those debts now fall to you." Deputy Kitteridge cleared his throat. "It's all legal-like, miss. Paper's been filed proper with the court." Mia's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "What debts?" "Father kept careful books. Loans taken out 3 seasons ago." Price interrupted. "With interest comes to nearly $800. His thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Course there are ways to work off such debts. My ranch could use someone of your capability." Leo's chair scraped. Back as he rose to his full height, towering over both Price and the deputy. "She's under my protection," he said, his quiet voice carrying the weight of thunder before a storm. Murmurs rippled through the cafe. Jenny dropped her pitcher with a clatter. Price took half a step back before catching himself. "Law's the law, McGraw," the deputy stammered. "Miss Dalton's got 1 week to settle up, or she'll be subject to indenture." Mia's hands were white-knuckled around her Bible now, but she met Price's gaze without flinching. "I'll need to see those loan documents," she said firmly. "All in good time," Price replied, already turning away. "1 week, Miss Dalton. Choose wisely." The door banged shut behind him and the deputy. In the silence that followed, Leo looked down at Mia. Her face was composed, but he could see the tremor in her hands. Making a quick decision, he pulled out his wallet and settled their bill. "We're leaving now," he said softly. "My wagon's out back. No sense in waiting till morning. Ranch is only an hour's ride with good lantern light." For a moment, Mia looked like she might protest, but then understanding dawned in her eyes. Until they knew more about these supposed debts, she needed somewhere safe to stay, somewhere with protection. "Much obliged," she said quietly, gathering her carpetbag and Bible. Outside, the evening had deepened into true night. Leo lit the wagon's lantern, its glow creating a small circle of warmth in the darkness. He helped Mia up onto the seat, noting how she moved with the same grace despite her troubled thoughts. As they rolled out of town, the prairie stretched vast and uncertain before them, painted silver by starlight. The wagon's wheels creaked a steady rhythm, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Leo held the reins loose in his hands, stealing glances at the strong profile of the woman beside him. Mia sat straight-backed against the cool night air, her Bible clutched close. The lantern light caught the determined set of her jaw, and Leo found himself admiring her courage. Here was a woman who had faced mockery all her life, yet carried herself with dignity, who had worked a man's labor without complaint, yet kept her feminine grace, who now faced an unknown threat, yet showed more steel than fear. The town lights faded behind them as they rode into the darkness, 2 souls finding unexpected alliance in the face of trouble. The prairie wind whispered secrets around them, and overhead, the stars wheeled in their ancient paths, watching over their journey into uncertainty. The wagon wheels groaned as they rolled across the moonlit prairie. Leo guided the horses with steady hands while Mia sat beside him, her carpetbag and Bible clutched close. The night air carried a hint of autumn chill, and stars blazed overhead like scattered diamonds. After nearly half an hour of silence, Mia's whisper barely carried over the creaking wheels. "What if they really do try to take me away?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I can't be bound in service to that man. Father always said debt was a chain worse than iron." Leo's hands tightened on the reins. "Won't happen," he said firmly. My land might not be much, but it's paid for free and clear. Whatever strength I have, whatever protection these arms can offer, it's yours to lean on." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The good book says we're meant to bear one another's burdens. Reckon that's what the Lord had in mind, bringing you here." Mia's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you," she breathed. "I've spent so long standing alone, I near forgot what it feels like to have someone beside me." The wagon rolled on through the darkness. Around 11 o'clock, they crested a small rise, and Leo's ranch came into view. The log cabin stood solid against the night sky, a thin wisp of smoke still rising from the stone chimney. A barn loomed nearby, and split rail fences stretched out into the darkness. "It ain't much," Leo said as he helped Mia down from the wagon. "But it's home." Inside, lantern light revealed a modest but clean main room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its embers still glowing faintly. Leo had left them banked that morning, hoping, but not quite daring to believe, he'd be bringing someone home. "Kitchen's through here," he said, leading the way. "Not much to look at, but the stove's good iron." He pointed out the pump at the sink, the root cellar door, the rows of empty preserve jars waiting to be filled. In the main room again, he gestured to a well-worn rocking chair near the hearth. That was Mother's. She'd sit there evenings, reading her Bible or mending. Colour crept into his cheeks as he looked around the sparse room. Truth is, place has needed a woman's touch these past years. I do what I can, but... Before he could finish, Mia was already moving. She set her carpet bag down and pulled out a small sack of flour. "Do you have yeast in your kitchen?" she asked, rolling up her sleeves. "Yes'm, in the tin by the stove." Within minutes, Mia had measured flour into a bowl and was working with practiced hands. "Nothing settles a soul like the smell of rising bread," she said, kneading the dough with strong, sure movements. "Mother taught me that before she passed." While the dough rose in a bowl near the stove's warmth, she measured coffee into the pot and hung it over the fire. Leo watched in amazement as his kitchen came alive with purpose. Thunder rolled in the distance as they sat with steaming cups, the familiar scent of coffee mixing with the promise of fresh bread. Rain began to patter against the windows, but inside the fire crackled warmly. "Storm's moving in," Leo observed. "Glad we made it home first." Mia nodded, her hands wrapped around her cup. "Home," she repeated softly, testing the word. Lightning flashed outside, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she seemed to draw strength from the storm's power, as if recognizing a kindred spirit in its wild energy. Leo marveled at her calm. Here was a woman who faced both nature's fury and man's cruelty with the same steady grace. The lamplight caught the strong lines of her face, softening them, revealing beauty in her quiet strength. As midnight approached, Leo showed her to the spare room. "It was my sister's before she married and moved to Denver," he explained. "Clean sheets on the bed, and there's extra quilts in the chest if you need them." Mia paused in the doorway. "Mr. McGraw, Leo," she said, turning to face him. "I want to thank you. Not just for the shelter, but for seeing me as more than my size, more than these supposed debts. Most folks take one look and make up their minds about what I'm worth. Miss Dalton?" he replied solemnly. "I reckon worth ain't measured in inches or dollars, but in the heart God gave us, and yours seems mighty fine to me." A small smile touched her lips. "Mia," she corrected gently. "After all, we're meant to be married soon." Leo nodded, his own smile warming his face. "Sleep well then, Mia. God's peace be with you." In his upstairs room, Leo knelt beside his bed as he had every night since childhood. But tonight's prayers carried special weight. "Lord," he whispered, "if this is your answer to my loneliness, this strong, gentle woman who fears you and faces life with courage, please make it clear. Help me protect her, guide her, cherish her as you intend." The storm rolled on across the prairie, but inside the ranch house peace settled like a blessing. In the kitchen below, bread dough rose in its bowl, filling the air with promise. Two souls, long accustomed to standing apart, found themselves under one roof, sensing the first stirrings of belonging. Dawn spilled golden light across the Colorado plains as Mia rose from her bed. She'd always been an early riser, trained by years of farm work. The floorboards creaked softly under her feet as she made her way to the kitchen, careful not to wake Leo. The kitchen stood quiet and cool in the morning light. Mia worked with practiced efficiency, stoking the stove fire and setting fresh coffee to brew. She found flour and lard in the pantry, mixing biscuit dough with sure hands. Soon the kitchen filled with the aroma of baking bread and sizzling bacon. Leo woke to unfamiliar scents drifting up the stairs. For a moment he lay still, wondering if he was dreaming. Then memory returned. Mia, the train station, last night's stormy ride home. He dressed quickly and descended the stairs, following his nose to the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway, eyes wide. The table was set with steaming plates, golden biscuits piled high beside strips of crispy bacon. Mia stood at the stove, her broad shoulders squared as she flipped another batch. "Morning," she said without turning. "Coffee's hot if you want some." "I reckon I'm still dreaming," Leo said, drawing a laugh from Mia that warmed the room better than any stove fire. They sat together, the table sturdy beneath their plates. At first they ate in shy silence, but soon found themselves sharing small stories between bites. Leo told her about his favorite horse, a steady bay named Thunder. Mia spoke of the wheat harvests back home, how the grain would wave like a golden sea. "Best biscuits I've had since Mother passed," Leo said, reaching for his third. "She'd have appreciated your cooking." Mia's cheeks colored at the praise. "Seems right to start a day with proper food. A body needs fuel for work." After breakfast, Leo led Mia to the barn. Morning sun streamed through gaps in the wooden walls, catching dust motes in golden beams. 4 horses stood in their stalls, heads turning at their entrance. "This here's Thunder," Leo said, patting the bay's neck. "Steadiest mount you'll find, and that's Star, Lightning, and Old Bessie." Each horse nickered in turn. Mia approached them confidently, offering her palm for them to sniff. "Fine animals," she said. "Well cared for, too." Leo pointed to a stack of hay bales. "Need to feed them first, then we can—" He broke off, watching in amazement as Mia hoisted a bale heavier than most men could manage. She carried it easily, setting it precisely where it needed to go. "Farm work builds strength," she said simply, noting his expression. "Can't always wait for help when there's work to be done." As they worked together, a wagon rattled past on the nearby road. The Henderson family, Leo's closest neighbors, slowed to stare at the sight of Mia hefting hay bales alongside him. Their youngest boy pointed, but Mrs. Henderson quickly pulled his hand down. Later that morning, they hitched Thunder and Star to the wagon and headed into town for supplies. Trinidad's streets bustled with the usual traffic. Ranch hands, merchants, families going about their business. Leo noticed how conversations hushed as they passed, then rose again in whispers. At the general store, Mr. Wilson's eyebrows shot up when they entered together, but he recovered quickly. "Morning, Leo, Ma'am." He nodded respectfully to Mia, who returned the gesture with quiet dignity. While Leo gathered nails and other repair supplies, Mia selected flour, sugar, and other kitchen necessities. A group of children from the parish school gathered near the candy jars, staring openly at her height. Instead of showing offense, Mia knelt down to their level. "Would you believe," she said with a gentle smile, "back home, they said I got so tall from eating too many green beans." The children giggled, their fear dissolving into curiosity. "Did you really?" the smallest girl asked. "Well, can't say for certain," Mia replied with a wink, "but it surely didn't hurt." As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Leo noticed several townspeople nodding in their direction. Not everyone, certainly. Plenty still whispered behind their hands. But it was a start. Back at the ranch, Leo showed Mia a section of fence that needed mending. Takes some practice to get the wire tension right. He began, but Mia was already reaching for the tools. Like this? She asked, demonstrating perfect technique. Father always said a tight fence makes good neighbors. They worked side by side through the afternoon, the fence taking shape under their combined efforts. The sun tracked west, painting the prairie grass in amber hues. Their shadows stretched long across the ground as they finished the last section. Supper was a quiet affair, but comfortable. They'd found a rhythm, passing plates without need for words. The kitchen felt lived in now, warmed by shared meals and growing trust. As darkness settled over the ranch, coyotes began their nightly chorus. Mia stiffened at the sound, her hand tightening on her fork. The wild howls brought back memories of other hunters, men in suits with papers and threats, circling her father's farm like wolves. Leo noticed her distress. "They won't come near the house," he said softly, then added with meaning, "Neither will Dalton Price or any other man meaning you harm. I gave my word." Mia met his eyes across the table. "I've learned that men's words can break like dry twigs." "Not mine," Leo said firmly. "Not ever." The quiet strength in his voice seemed to fill the room, steady as the ground beneath their feet. They sat in silence then, listening to the coyotes' distant song. But the kitchen remained warm and bright, a sanctuary against the gathering night. Whatever threats lurked in the darkness, they would face them together. The Sunday morning sun cast long shadows across Trinidad's dusty streets as Leo guided the wagon toward the white clapboard church. Mia sat beside him, wearing her best dress and clutching her father's worn Bible. The leather-bound book seemed small in her large hands, yet she held it with gentle reverence. As they approached, church bells rang clear across the prairie, calling the faithful to worship. Townsfolk gathered on the wooden steps, their conversations falling to whispers as Leo helped Mia down from the wagon. The couple's combined height cast an impressive shadow against the church's weathered walls. Pastor Green stood at the door, his kind eyes crinkling as he smiled. "Welcome, welcome," he called out, extending his hand first to Leo, then to Mia. "It brings joy to see new faces in God's house." Inside, sunlight filtered through simple glass windows, painting golden patterns on rough wooden pews. Leo and Mia found seats near the back, the bench creaking slightly under their weight. A few children twisted in their seats to stare, but their mothers quickly turned them around with gentle tugs. The service began with "Amazing Grace," the familiar hymn rising toward the rafters. When Mia joined in, her deep, rich voice carried through the congregation. Several heads turned in surprise, not at her size now, but at the beauty of her singing. Her voice blended perfectly with the higher notes of the other women, adding depth and warmth to the harmony. Leo found himself stealing glances at her as she sang. The morning light caught the determination in her profile, the same strength he'd seen that first day at the train station. Here, surrounded by the smell of old hymnals and wood polish, she seemed to belong as naturally as any of them. After the final prayer, the congregation spilled out into the churchyard. Before Leo could reach for his hat, a group of children from the parish school came running up to him, their Sunday shoes kicking up dust. "Mr. Bear, Mr. Bear," they called out, using his nickname without fear. "Did you bring any peppermint sticks?" Leo's weathered face broke into a broad smile as he reached into his coat pocket. "Now, what kind of friend would I be if I forgot?" He pulled out a handful of striped candy, wrapped in wax paper. The children gathered around, but stopped short when they noticed Mia. She didn't hesitate. Instead, she knelt down in the dirt, her skirts pooling around her. At their level, her size seemed to dissolve, leaving only warmth in her eyes and gentleness in her movements. "Would you like help unwrapping those?" she asked softly. Small hands reached out, trust winning over uncertainty. A little girl named Sarah hung back, shyly fingering her loose hair. Mia noticed and patted the ground beside her. "Come here, sweetheart. Would you like me to fix your braid? It's coming undone." Sarah nodded and settled in front of Mia. With surprising delicacy, Mia's large fingers began weaving the child's hair into a neat plait. Several townswomen watched from the church steps, their expressions shifting from initial shock to something softer as they observed the tender scene. "There now," Mia said, tying off the braid with a ribbon. "Pretty as a picture." The other children crowded closer, asking questions about the farm and the horses. Leo watched as Mia answered each one patiently, her face glowing with simple joy. The sight stirred something deep in his chest, a feeling of rightness he'd rarely known. "You know," he said, addressing the gathered children, "Miss Mia makes the best biscuits this side of the Mississippi." He glanced at her, seeking permission. "Perhaps you'd all like to come for supper next week? We could tell stories and maybe sing some more hymns." The children's eyes lit up, but they looked to Mia for confirmation. She nodded, smiling broadly. "We'd be honored to have you. All of you." She included the orphan's caretaker in her glance, who stood nearby with tears in her eyes at seeing her charges so warmly welcomed. The ride home began bathed in the glory of a Colorado sunset. Pink and gold clouds stretched across the sky, while purple shadows gathered in the valleys. Leo and Mia spoke quietly of the service, of the children's laughter, of plans for the upcoming supper. Hope rode with them like a third passenger, warm and present. But as they approached the ranch gate, 3 dark figures on horseback blocked their path. The sunset at their backs cast their faces in shadow, but Leo recognized Dalton Price's lean frame instantly. Beside him sat 2 men in citified clothes, railroad men by their look. "Well, well," Price drawled, his voice cutting through the evening peace. "If it ain't the happy couple." Leo pulled the wagon to a stop, his hand tightening on the reins. "Evening, Price. You're a fair piece from town." One of the railroad men, wearing a sharp-brimmed hat, leaned forward. "Mr. Price has been kind enough to inform us of a certain business matter." He pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Seems the debt held against Miss Dalton here has been purchased by the railroad company." Mia's breath caught audibly. Leo felt her stiffen beside him. "A proper writ will arrive soon," the second railroad man added, his tone falsely pleasant. "The company requires workers at our northern camp. Strong backs are hard to find these days." "She ain't going nowhere," Leo said, his voice low but firm. "She's under my protection now." Price laughed, an ugly sound in the gathering dusk. "Protection? The law's the law, McGraw. Besides, seems to me the railroad could use someone of her particular qualities." The 3 men wheeled their horses around, Price calling over his shoulder, "Enjoy your time together." "Won't last long." They rode away, leaving Leo and Mia sitting silent in the wagon. The beautiful sunset had faded, leaving only grey twilight and a heavy weight in the air. The joy of the morning, the hymns, the children's laughter, the simple pleasure of belonging, seemed to dim like a lantern running low on oil. Leo turned to say something, anything, but Mia's face had gone still as stone, her eyes fixed on the darkening horizon where the railroad men had disappeared. The night settled around them, full of unspoken fears and gathering shadows. Dawn painted the kitchen windows with pale light as Leo stirred the pot of cornmeal mush. The spoon made thick, bubbling sounds as he worked, his movements careful despite his size. Mia sat at the worn table, her father's Bible open before her, though her eyes were distant with worry. "Reckon we ought to ride into town," Leo said, ladling the steaming mush into 2 bowls. "Judge Harlan's a fair man. Maybe he can help us sort this mess." Mia accepted her bowl with a grateful nod, but her expression remained troubled. "I've seen how the law bends toward men with money, Leo. My pa learned that lesson hard." She stirred her breakfast slowly, watching the butter melt into golden pools. "Railroad men especially. They've got lawyers in Denver, maybe clear to Chicago." Leo settled his large frame into the chair across from her, the wood creaking beneath him. "Then what do you suggest?" Mia straightened, squaring her shoulders. "My father's chest, the one I brought in my trunk. There might be something there that could help." She pushed her bowl aside, determination replacing the worry in her eyes. Pa kept careful records of everything. Together they climbed the narrow stairs to the spare room where Mia's trunk sat. The morning light streamed through the window, catching dust motes as Mia lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay her father's chest, crafted from dark wood worn smooth by years of handling. Leo watched as she reverently removed each item. Work-worn shirts patched with careful stitches, a wooden cross that had hung above her father's bed, and finally, the Bible. Different from the one she carried daily, this one bulged with papers and showed signs of frequent use, its pages dog-eared and margins filled with cramped writing. They carried it back to the kitchen table. Mia's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing row after row of penciled notes. "See here." She pointed to columns of numbers and dates. Pa recorded every bushel of wheat delivered, every payment made. Leo leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers as they pored over the careful tallies. "These show regular payments," he said, running his finger down one page, "but without official seals or bank drafts. It might not be enough?" Mia's voice caught. "Just a farmer's careful counting against their fancy papers." Frustration boiled up in Leo's chest. His fist came down hard on the table, making the dishes rattle. "It ain't right. They can't just—" Mia's hand found his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "Easy now," she said softly. "Remember what Pastor Green said yesterday. Faith requires patience." Her fingers squeezed once before letting go. "The Lord ain't finished with this story yet." Leo's breathing steadied. He looked at her hand, still resting near his, and nodded slowly. "You're right. Getting riled won't help." "Come on," Mia said, standing. "There's work needs doing. Best medicine for worried minds." They spent the afternoon mending fences along the north pasture, the physical labor a welcome distraction. Leo marveled at how naturally they worked together, Mia holding the posts steady while he drove them deep, passing tools back and forth without need for words. The autumn sun warmed their shoulders as they moved down the fence line, checking for loose wires and rotted wood. When shadows began stretching across the prairie, they turned toward home. The cattle needed tending, and the evening chores wouldn't do themselves. Mia headed to the kitchen while Leo saw to the livestock, each falling into the rhythm of ranch life, as if they'd been doing this dance for years instead of days. The smell of stew greeted Leo when he returned from the barn. Mia stood at the stove, stirring a pot of something that made his mouth water. Without turning, she said, "Wash up. It's nearly ready." Leo pumped water into the basin, scrubbing his hands clean. As he dried them on the rough towel, words he'd been holding all day suddenly spilled out. "I ain't prayed with anyone since Ma passed." He swallowed hard. "Been too long doing everything alone." Mia turned from the stove, her eyes soft with understanding. "Then maybe that's where we start." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Will you pray with me now?" Leo nodded, his throat tight with emotion. They sat at the table, the steaming bowls of stew before them untouched. Mia reached across, taking his large hand in hers, their fingers interlaced naturally, like pieces of a puzzle finding their match. "Dear Lord," Mia began, her deep voice quiet but steady. "We come before you with troubled hearts." Leo's voice joined hers, rough at first, then gaining strength. Their words rose together in the quiet kitchen, asking for guidance, for wisdom, for the strength to face whatever came next. The last rays of sunlight slanted through the window, blessing their joined hands with golden light. The week unfolded in a steady rhythm of preparation. Each morning, Leo and Mia rose before dawn, tackling their usual ranch work, before turning to the special tasks ahead. The upcoming orphan meal consumed their thoughts and energy, but neither complained about the extra labor. Mia tended the plump chickens with particular care, scattering extra corn and watching with satisfaction as they grew heavier by the day. "These little ones will make fine eating," she told Leo, brushing feed dust from her apron. In the kitchen, she worked magic with flour and butter, turning out golden-crusted berry pies that filled the house with sweet fragrance. Leo marveled at how she managed it all. Whether hauling water or rolling pastry, she moved with the same quiet grace. Even when a chicken escaped her grasp, sending feathers flying, she laughed heartily, her voice carrying across the yard. "Come help me catch this troublemaker," she called, and Leo couldn't help grinning as they cornered the wayward bird together. Word of the gathering spread through Trinidad like wildfire. At the general store, townsfolk whispered about the giant couple's hospitality. Even those who had scorned them showed interest, perhaps curious to see how such unusual hosts would manage. The morning of the feast arrived crisp and clear. Mia was up before first light, stoking the stove and setting bread to rise. Leo found her humming hymns as she worked, her face peaceful despite the busy day ahead. "Tables need setting outside," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "Weather's too fine to keep everyone cooped up indoors." Leo nodded, already heading for the barn where they stored the extra tables and benches borrowed from church. Together they arranged them in the yard, creating long rows beneath the cottonwood trees. Mia covered each with clean sheets for tablecloths, weighing the corners with smooth stones against the prairie breeze. "More water needed," Leo observed, eyeing the barrels. He grabbed the buckets and headed to the well, his powerful arms making quick work of drawing up the cool water. From the corner of his eye, he watched Mia arranging plates and cups, speaking gentle words to each item as if they were old friends. Her way of making every task seem natural, even joyful, warmed his heart. The first wagon appeared just past noon, kicking up dust along the road. Soon more followed, carriages and wagons loaded with excited children from the parish school, their caretakers holding tight to squirming bodies. Behind them came townsfolk, some bearing additional dishes to share. The orphans tumbled out like puppies, their eyes wide at the sight of the laden tables. The aroma of roasted chicken and fresh-baked pies drew them like magnets. Mia welcomed each child with a warm smile, kneeling down to their level despite her height. Leo distributed candies from his pockets, his large hands surprisingly gentle as tiny fingers reached for the treats. "Never seen them take to strangers so quick, Sister Mary," Margaret remarked to another nun, watching as a small girl grabbed Mia's skirts for balance. The feast began with a blessing. Dozens of heads bowed beneath the autumn sky. Then came the joyful chaos of serving. Platters passed, cups filled, children wiggling with impatience. The chicken proved just as succulent as Mia had promised, and the pies disappeared slice by slice. Laughter filled the air, mingling with the rustle of leaves overhead. Leo caught sight of Mrs. Henderson, who had once crossed the street to avoid him, now asking Mia for her pie recipe. Several men who had jeered at the train station approached Leo, shuffling their feet. "We was wrong about you folks," Tom Wilson said gruffly. "Reckon we owe you an apology." Leo accepted their words with a quiet nod, noting how Mia's strength had helped change their hearts. She moved among the guests like a tall ship under full sail, confident and graceful, her laugh carrying across the yard. As the sun began to sink, someone suggested hymns. Voices rose in familiar melodies, swelling stronger when Mia's deep, clear tones led the way. Even the children joined in, their sweet voices lifting amazing grace to the darkening sky. Leo was lighting the lanterns, their warm glow creating pools of light around the tables, when heavy hoofbeats interrupted the singing. Dalton Price rode up, flanked by two railroad men in dark suits. The cheerful atmosphere cracked like ice on a spring pond. Price dismounted, his boots raising dust as he strode toward the gathering. In his hand, he held papers that caught the lantern light, official documents marked with red legal seals. "Quite a gathering," he said, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. "Shame it has to end this way." He turned to face Mia, who stood straight-backed beside Leo. "But business is business. This writ gives us legal right to collect on your father's debt. You'll be expected at the railroad camp by week's end." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sister Mary Margaret pulled children closer, while other guests shifted uncomfortably. The official seals gleamed like blood drops on the paper. Mia's hand found Leo's arm, gripping it tight. Though her face remained composed, Leo felt the slight tremor in her fingers. "We're still looking into those claims," she said, her voice steady despite the fear Leo sensed beneath it. "Look all you want," Price sneered. "But be packed by Sunday. The railroad doesn't like to be kept waiting." With that, he and his men mounted up, leaving the celebration in shambles. The lantern light flickered across concerned faces. Children whispered questions to their caretakers. The night air, so recently filled with song, now felt heavy with uncertainty. Mia's hand remained on Leo's arm, both drawing and giving strength, as their guests began quietly gathering their things to leave. The yard gradually emptied of wagons and families, leaving behind scattered plates and the remnants of their joyful gathering. Leo and Mia stood together in the lantern light, watching until the last wagon disappeared into the darkness, the weight of Price's threat hanging between them like an autumn storm about to break. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the prairie in soft gold. Leo stood at the bedroom window, watching the first rays touch the distant hills. He had barely slept, his mind churning with worry over Mia's fate. The sound of her moving about downstairs, preparing breakfast as if it were any ordinary morning, made his chest ache. After a simple meal of cornbread and coffee, Leo pulled on his coat and headed to the barn. His boots crunched on the frost-covered ground as Mia followed him out to the porch. She wrapped her shawl tighter against the morning chill, her tall frame casting a long shadow. "I have to try," Leo said, leading his bay horse from the stable. "Judge Harlan's a fair man. Maybe he'll see reason." Mia nodded, her face calm, though her hands twisted in her shawl. "I'll be praying," she said softly. "The good book says faith can move mountains. Perhaps it can move a judge's heart, too." Leo's large fingers fumbled with the saddle straps, his usual dexterity deserting him. When Mia stepped forward to help, their hands brushed briefly. The touch steadied him, reminding him what he was fighting for. "I packed you some bread and cheese," she said, handing him a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. "The ride to town is long." Leo secured the package in his saddlebag, along with Mia's father's Bible. The worn leather book seemed to weigh more than it should, heavy with their hopes. He swung into the saddle, the horse shifting beneath his considerable weight. "God be with you," Mia called as he turned toward town. Leo looked back once to see her still standing on the porch, her strong silhouette framed against the morning sky. The sight of her there, so steadfast despite her fears, gave him courage. The ride into Trinidad took 2 hours at a steady pace. Leo's mind wandered as his horse picked its way along the familiar trail. He remembered the day Mia stepped off the train, how she had faced the crowd's mockery with quiet dignity. Now, barely 2 weeks later, he couldn't imagine the ranch without her. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Leo reached town. Dark clouds gathered overhead, promising rain. He tied his horse outside the courthouse and took the Bible from his saddlebag, holding it close against the rising wind. Inside, the courthouse halls echoed with his heavy footsteps. A clerk tried to stop him, saying Judge Harlan was reviewing cases, but Leo pushed past. He burst through the office door, startling the judge who sat reading at his desk. "McGraw," Judge Harlan said, looking up with stern disapproval, "this is highly irregular." "Begging your pardon, Judge," Leo said, his voice rough with emotion. "But this can't wait. It's about Mia Dalton and that railroad claim." The judge set down his papers with a sigh. "The writ has already been issued, McGraw. The law is clear on debt collection." "Please." Leo stepped forward, carefully laying the Bible on the judge's desk. Her father kept records. Every bushel of wheat delivered, every payment made. It's all here in the margins. Judge Harlan opened the Bible, his grey brows furrowing as he studied the penciled notes. Pages of careful tallies filled the margins, dates and numbers in neat rows. But after several minutes, he shook his head. "I'm sorry, son. Without official signatures or receipts, these marks could have been made by anyone. They hold no legal weight against proper documentation." Leo's shoulders slumped. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the courthouse windows. "There must be something," he pleaded. "Some way to prove?" "The railroad has presented signed contracts and legal papers," Judge Harlan said firmly. "Unless you can produce documents of equal standing, my hands are tied." Defeat settled over Leo like a heavy blanket. He gathered up the Bible with trembling hands, its pages now seeming worthless despite the truth they contained. Without another word, he turned and left the office. The rain fell steadily as Leo rode home, soaking through his coat. He barely noticed the discomfort, too lost in his failure. The thought of facing Mia with this news made his chest tight with grief. Back at the ranch, Mia had spent the day keeping her hands busy to quiet her mind. She mended Leo's work shirts, her strong fingers making neat stitches as she softly sang hymns. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." Her deep voice carried through the empty house. "That saved a wretch like me." When she heard hoofbeats through the rain, Mia set aside her sewing and hurried to the door. Leo dismounted slowly, water streaming from his hat and coat. One look at his face told her everything. "The judge wouldn't accept the Bible records," he said roughly, following her inside. "Said we need official papers." His voice broke on the last words. Mia took his wet coat, concern etching her features as she saw how defeated he looked. This giant of a man, who had stood so strong against the world's cruelty, seemed to crumple before her eyes. "I failed you," Leo whispered. For the first time since his mother's death, tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. "I'm not big enough to fight them, not strong enough to keep you safe." "Oh, Leo." Mia stepped close, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders. Though she matched his height, in this moment she seemed to tower with inner strength. "Don't you remember David and Goliath? Giants fall not by size, but by faith." Leo leaned into her embrace, letting out a shuddering breath. "I'm scared, Mia, scared of losing you, of failing God's plan." "Then we'll pray together," she said firmly. "On our knees, before the only one big enough to move mountains." They knelt on the rough wooden floor, their clasped hands bridging the space between them. Mia's clear voice led the prayer, asking for guidance, for protection, for a miracle to light their darkness. Leo's deeper tones joined hers, their words rising above the storm's fury outside. The rain lashed the cabin windows, and wind moaned through the eaves, but inside, a fragile peace settled over them. When exhaustion finally drove them to their beds, sleep came heavy and deep despite their troubles. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through rain-washed windows. They rose to face the final week before the deadline, their hearts steadied by shared faith, if not by earthly assurance. The mountain before them remained, but they would climb it together, holding fast to hope and each other. Leo found Mia already at the stove, cooking breakfast as if nothing had changed. Her quiet strength moved him deeply. Whatever came next, he knew God had blessed him beyond measure by sending him a partner who matched him in both stature and spirit. The days crept by like molasses in winter. Each sunrise brought them closer to the deadline, but Leo and Mia refused to surrender hope. On Wednesday morning, they hitched the wagon together, determination setting their faces as they prepared to confront Dalton Price. "We should stop at the church first," Mia suggested, settling her broad frame onto the wagon seat. "Pastor Green might have wisdom to share." Leo nodded, gathering the reins in his large hands. The morning air held a bite of autumn, and their breath fogged as the wagon rolled toward town. Neither spoke much, both lost in prayer and planning. The little white church stood quiet when they arrived, but smoke curled from the chimney where Pastor Green kept his study warm. He answered their knock with a gentle smile, ushering them into the humble room lined with books. "I've been praying for you both," he said, clearing papers from chairs so they could sit. The furniture creaked under their weight, but held steady. Mia pulled her father's Bible from her shawl, handling it like precious gold. "We hoped you might look at something, Pastor." She opened to the marked pages, showing the careful records penciled in the margins. Pastor Green settled his spectacles on his nose, leaning close to study the neat columns of numbers and dates. "Your father was quite thorough," he murmured, tracing the lines with one finger. "The judge says it's not enough," Leo explained, his deep voice heavy with frustration. "Says we need official proof." The pastor looked up, his eyes brightening. "What about witnesses? Surely there were people who saw the wheat being delivered, who helped with the harvest or transport?" Mia straightened, hope dawning on her face. "Yes. Old Widow Carson's boys used to haul grain, and Mr. Peterson worked our threshing crew 3 seasons running. The Cooper family too," Leo added. "They lent wagons every harvest time." Pastor Green reached for his pen and paper. "Let's make a list. If enough honest folk testify to these deliveries, it might carry weight with the judge." They spent the next hour recording names, remembering faces from years of harvest seasons. The list grew steadily. Farmhands, neighboring families, even the mill owner's son who'd helped weigh loads. "I'll help gather their statements," Pastor Green offered, straightening the pages. "Written testimony, properly witnessed, might stand against Price's claims." New energy filled them as they hitched the wagon again. They spent the afternoon visiting homes around Trinidad, knocking on doors and sharing their story. Many remembered Mia's father as an honest man who always paid his debts. Widow Carson wept when she heard of the railroad's claim. "Your pa helped feed my children that winter after John died," she told Mia. "I'll testify to any judge about his character." As the sun began to set, they gathered back at the church with nearly a dozen willing witnesses. Pastor Green's study filled with the smell of coffee and the scratch of his pen as he carefully recorded each statement. Mia, ever practical, had brought bread and stew to share. The small room hummed with quiet conversation as people ate and remembered, their presence a balm to Leo and Mia's worried hearts. "Remember that spring flood?" Mr. Peterson chuckled, passing his bowl for seconds. "Your pa's wheat kept half the county fed till new crops came in." Yet through the warmth of fellowship, Leo noticed movement through the window. Riders watched from the hills above town, their shapes dark against the dying light. He recognized the railroad agent's distinctive hat among them. "They're watching?" he murmured to Mia as she poured more coffee. She squared her shoulders, meeting his concerned gaze. "Let them. We're doing nothing wrong." The ride home was tense, both scanning the shadows for followers. Their fears proved warranted when they reached the ranch. Even from a distance, they could see the barn door, standing open, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. Leo grabbed the lantern and jumped down, his large frame tense as he approached. Inside, the livestock huddled nervously in their stalls. Nothing appeared stolen, but someone had deliberately spooked the animals and left the door open, a clear warning. Mia stood in the lantern's glow, her face set with righteous anger. Wind tugged at her skirts as she surveyed the barn, but she planted her feet firmly. "They think to frighten us," she said, voice steady and strong. "But I will not be driven off like chaff in the wind. The Lord is my strength and my shield." Leo reached for her hand, marveling at her courage. Together they calmed the animals and set the barn to rights, their shared work a quiet defiance against those who would separate them. Later, as they sat at their kitchen table reviewing the day's testimonies, Leo studied Mia's determined profile in the lamplight. She had brought such strength to his lonely life. Strength of body, yes, but more importantly, strength of spirit. Whatever came next, they would face it together, standing tall in faith and truth. The morning sun cast long shadows across Trinidad's dusty streets as Leo and Mia made their way to the general store. Whispers followed them like autumn leaves scratching at their peace. Behind counters and through windows, townsfolk who had smiled at their Sunday feast now turned away, faces clouded with doubt. "Heard they're trying to cheat the railroad," one woman muttered to another. "Using forged papers, they say." Leo's jaw tightened, but Mia's steady hand on his arm kept him moving forward. They had work to do, and gossip wouldn't stop them. Outside the store, Deputy Kitteridge stepped into their path, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Mr. McGraw," he said, voice clipped and official. "Need a word." They moved to the side of the boardwalk, where the deputy's eyes darted between them. Railroad men are mighty upset about those testimonies you're gathering, suggesting it might be witness tampering. That's nonsense, Leo growled, his size making the deputy step back. These are honest folk telling truth. Kitteridge raised his hands. Just passing along friendly advice. Keep pushing, and someone might find reason to lock you up for interfering with legal proceedings. He adjusted his badge, trying to stand taller. Tread careful, McGraw. Price has friends in high places. They watched him stride away, boots clicking importantly on wooden planks. Mia's fingers tightened on Leo's arm. We can't let them silence truth with threats. No, Leo agreed, his voice soft but firm. We can't. They spent the rest of the morning with Pastor Green in his study, carefully writing out each testimony. The pastor's pen scratched steadily across paper as they transformed memories into legal statements. Outside the window, railroad men rode past repeatedly, making sure they were seen. Judge Harlan is a fair man, Pastor Green assured them, signing his name as witness to another affidavit. Once he sees these statements, he'll have to consider them. By late afternoon, exhaustion weighed on them all. The stack of sworn statements sat neatly tied with string, ready for the judge's review. Pastor Green promised to deliver them personally the next morning. The Lord sees truth, he reminded them, standing in his doorway as they prepared to leave. Keep faith strong. The ride home was quiet, both Leo and Mia lost in thought. The setting sun painted the prairie grass golden, while overhead, clouds gathered like wool. At the ranch, they worked together to feed livestock and close up the barn, moving in the comfortable rhythm they'd developed over their short time together. Later, as night settled around their cabin, they sat at the kitchen table with coffee steaming between them. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting warm light across their tired faces. Neither spoke for a long while, simply sharing the peace of being together. Finally, Leo cleared his throat. Never thought I'd find this, he said softly, staring into his cup. Find what? Mia asked, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew. Someone to share silence with. He looked up, meeting her gaze. Used to think marriage would just make the loneliness worse. Folks pointing and laughing at both of us instead of just me. His large hands wrapped around the coffee cup. But now, I can't imagine going back to life without you here. Color rose in Mia's cheeks, but she didn't look away. I gave up hoping for kindness from men, she admitted. Years of being called. Names, ox, giant, freak. Learned to stand alone, to be strong because I had to be. She paused, her voice growing softer. Until you looked at me like I was beautiful. Leo's hand moved across the table, covering hers, their fingers interlaced, fitting together like they were made for each other. No words were needed as they sat there, hearts speaking in the silence. The quiet moment shattered at the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Leo rose, moving to the window. In the moonlight, he recognized Dalton Price's silver mare, the rancher's form dark against the night sky. Price rode slowly past their gate, close enough that they could see his face clearly in the cabin's lamplight. His expression was hard as he stared at their home, a warning in every line of his posture. Mia stood beside Leo, her shoulder touching his as they watched Price disappear into the darkness. He means to frighten us apart, she said quietly. Won't work. Leo turned to face her, his eyes full of determination and something deeper, something that made Mia's heart beat faster. Whatever comes tomorrow or the next day, we face it together. She nodded, strength flowing between them where their hands joined. Outside, clouds covered the moon, and a coyote called lonely across the prairie. But inside their cabin, love bloomed like winter wheat. Quiet, strong, and unstoppable. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft rose and gold as Leo and Mia hitched their horses to the wagon. Their breath made small clouds in the crisp morning air while they worked, checking straps and securing their precious cargo. The Bible with its wheat tallies and the stack of sworn affidavits tied with string. Reckon we've done all we can to prepare? Leo said quietly, helping Mia up onto the wagon seat. His large hands trembled slightly, betraying the nerves he tried to hide. Mia clutched her father's Bible close, its worn leather familiar against her palms. "The truth will speak for itself," she replied, though her voice wavered. "We just need to trust." They rode toward Trinidad in silence, the wagon wheels cutting fresh tracks in the morning dew. As they approached town, church bells rang 7 times, their clear tones carrying across the prairie. Already people were gathering outside the courthouse, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Pastor Green met them at the hitching post, his kind face creased with concern. "Judge Harlan's ready to begin," he said, helping them unload their documents. "Half the town's turned out to watch." Inside the courthouse, wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious neighbors. Through the high windows, small faces appeared, orphans from the parish school, standing on tiptoes to peer inside. Their presence reminded Leo and Mia of the Sunday feast that seemed so long ago now. Dalton Price sat near the front, flanked by 2 sharp-dressed railroad lawyers. Their polished boots and city suits stood out among the work clothes and dusty boots of the townspeople. Price turned as Leo and Mia entered, his thin smile cold as a winter wind. "All rise," the deputy called out as Judge Harlan entered, his black robes sweeping behind him. The judge's grey hair caught the morning light as he settled behind his desk, adjusting his spectacles with careful precision. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice filling the room. "We are here to examine evidence regarding a debt claim against Miss Mia Dalton, now transferred to railroad holdings." He peered over his glasses at the assembled crowd. "Let's proceed with order and dignity." The railroad's lawyer spoke first, presenting documents with official seals and flourishing signatures. He painted a picture of unpaid debts and broken contracts, his words smooth as river stones. Price nodded along, playing his part as the wronged businessman. Then came their witnesses. First was Widow Harrison, her grey hair neatly pinned beneath her bonnet. She spoke clearly about counting wheat bushels from the Dalton farm, recording each delivery in her own ledger as payment against store credit. "Kept those numbers careful as scripture," she declared, meeting Price's glare without flinching. "That wheat was delivered fair and square." Thomas Wheeler, the grain depot clerk, testified next. His fingers were still stained with ink as he described weighing wagons full of Dalton wheat. "Marked every pound myself," he said firmly. "Quality grain, too." "Worth more than the going rate," Price's lawyer objected repeatedly, claiming these memories couldn't override signed contracts. But Pastor Green stepped forward then, presenting Mia's father's Bible, with its penciled notes. "These entries match the witnesses' recollections," the pastor explained, pointing to careful columns of numbers and dates. "A man of faith recording his honest dealings before God?" Judge Harlan examined the Bible closely, turning pages with reverent care. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp as he compared dates and amounts. The morning stretched into afternoon, sun climbing high while testimony continued. Finally, the judge set down his pen and removed his spectacles. "This case requires careful consideration," he announced. "I'll need time to review all evidence properly. Court will recess until further notice when additional documentation arrives." The crowd murmured as they filed out. Price and his lawyers huddled together, speaking in low voices. Leo felt hollow, caught between hope and fear. Mia's hand found his, their fingers intertwining for strength. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Neither felt ready to ride home, knowing Price's men might be watching their ranch. "Stay with me tonight," Pastor Green offered, reading their concern. "My house is humble, but there's room enough." They accepted gratefully, following him to his small home near the church. The pastor's housekeeper had left a pot of stew warming on the stove, its simple aroma filling the kitchen with comfort. "The Lord provides," Green said, breaking bread to share. They ate quietly, each lost in thoughts of the day's proceedings. As night settled over Trinidad, sleep proved elusive. Leo found himself pacing the pastor's narrow porch, his large frame casting moonlight shadows. Words of prayer tumbled from his lips, asking for guidance, for strength, for justice to prevail. He didn't hear Mia approach until her hand touched his shoulder, warm and steady. "Faith is our lantern," she whispered, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had first drawn him to her at the train station. Together they stood in the cool night air, watching stars pierce the darkness overhead. Each point of light seemed to echo their hopes, distant perhaps, but constant and true. Their shoulders touched, sharing warmth and resolve for whatever tomorrow might bring. The town clock struck midnight, its chimes floating across sleeping rooftops. Still they stayed, drawing comfort from each other's presence, while Trinidad dreamed and the prairie wind whispered secrets to the sage. Morning sunlight streamed through Trinidad's windows as the telegraph office burst into life. The operator's fingers flew across the keys, transcribing incoming messages that would change everything. Dots and dashes carried hope across the wire, word by word confirming what Mia had claimed all along. Leo and Mia had just finished a simple breakfast at Pastor Green's home when the pastor burst through his front door, waving a handful of yellow papers. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he caught his breath. "The telegrams!" he exclaimed. "They've been arriving since dawn. Kansas City, Topeka, all the rail yards between here and your father's farm, Mia. They found the records." Mia's hands trembled as she read the transcribed messages. Each one detailed wheat shipments from years past, weights and dates matching the careful notes in her father's Bible. Tears welled in her eyes as she traced her finger over the numbers. "There's more," Pastor Green continued. "A clerk from the Kansas Territory Land Office is here. He was delayed by snow in the passes, but he arrived on the morning train. He brings sealed documents." Leo stood, his large frame casting a shadow across the room. "Then we'd best get to the courthouse." They hurried through Trinidad's streets, now busy with morning traffic. Word spread quickly. Shopkeepers stepped out to watch them pass, and children ran alongside, sensing something important was about to happen. At the courthouse steps, they found a small man in a dusty black coat clutching a leather satchel. "Miss Dalton?" the clerk asked, tipping his hat. "I've been carrying these records half across the territory, trying to catch up with you." Inside the courthouse, Judge Harlan was already seated at his bench. Dalton Price and his railroad lawyers sat in their usual places, looking less confident than before. The room filled quickly with townsfolk, their boots scraping against wooden floors. "Your Honor," Pastor Green called out, "we have new evidence to present." The traveling clerk stepped forward, producing official documents with territorial seals. His voice carried clearly as he explained how winter. Storms had delayed him. One by one, he laid out receipts showing wheat deliveries, payments recorded, and debts settled. Judge Harlan leaned forward, examining each paper with careful attention. His eyes narrowed as he compared dates and amounts to those in Mia's father's Bible. The room held its breath, watching his expression. "These records," the judge announced, "appear to be in perfect order. They confirm Miss Dalton's claims that all debts were paid in full through wheat deliveries to railroad-contracted grain merchants." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dalton Price's face darkened like a thundercloud. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "these sealed receipts prove that knowledge of these payments existed within railroad offices. This raises serious questions about the legitimacy of their claim." "This is nonsense!" Dalton Price exploded from his chair, face flushed red. "You can't trust some weather-delayed paperwork over properly filed claims." "Silence." Judge Harlan's gavel cracked against wood. "Mr. Price, control yourself or be removed." Price jabbed a finger toward Leo and Mia. "You'll regret this, both of you. The railroad doesn't forget—" "That's enough!" The judge's voice thundered through the courtroom. "One more word, and I'll have you held in contempt. Now hear my ruling." The room grew still. Even the children watching through windows seemed to hold their breath. "Based on this evidence, I hereby declare the debt claim against Miss Mia Dalton null and void. The writ of indenture is vacated." Judge Harlan's words rang with finality. "This case is closed." Leo's massive hand engulfed Mia's, squeezing gently. She returned the pressure, her shoulders finally relaxing after weeks of tension. Around them, the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. The orphans who had been watching burst through the doors, running to wrap their arms around Mia's skirts. Their high voices carried over the general noise, calling out congratulations and begging for another feast soon. Dalton Price stormed from the courthouse, shouldering roughly past Pastor Green. His railroad lawyers followed, their faces dark with displeasure. Outside, their horses' hooves clattered against packed earth as they rode away, defeat hanging heavy on their shoulders. As Leo and Mia stepped into the afternoon sunlight, neighbors surrounded them with handshakes and warm wishes. Women who had once whispered behind their hands now offered genuine smiles. Men who had mocked their sighs now showed respect in their eyes. The church bell began to ring, its clear tones carrying across the town. Pastor Green had arranged an impromptu celebration, and wagons soon arrived carrying food and drink. Children played in the street while adults gathered to share the moment. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, Leo helped Mia onto their wagon for the ride home. She sat tall beside him, no longer burdened by false debts or others' judgment. The first stars appeared overhead as they followed the familiar trail to their ranch, the evening air sweet with sage and freedom. Their horses' steady gait carried them through gathering dusk, hooves raising small clouds of dust that gilded in the last light. Leo glanced at Mia's profile, seeing peace settle over her features like a blessing. Behind them, Trinidad's lights twinkled as neighbors continued their celebration. Ahead lay their home, their shared future now unclouded by threats. The prairie stretched wide around them, a land of second chances and answered prayers. Dawn broke over Trinidad with golden promise. Wildflowers bobbed in children's arms as they raced toward the white clapboard church, their baskets overflowing with purple lupines and yellow daisies. Inside, townswomen arranged mason jars filled with blooms, while men carried wooden benches from wagons, setting them in neat rows. Pastor Green moved thoughtfully around his pulpit, polishing the worn wood until it gleamed. His gentle humming of hymns mixed with the busy sounds of preparation. The morning air grew sweet with the scent of fresh-baked pies cooling on windowsills, brought by neighbors who once whispered cruel jokes but now worked with genuine warmth. In the small back room, Leo stood before a mirror, fingers fumbling with his string tie. His boots had been polished to a mirror shine, and his usually wild hair lay flat and neat beneath careful combing. His massive frame, normally so commanding, seemed to tremble slightly as he adjusted his clean white shirt. "Steady now," Pastor Green said softly, helping straighten the tie. "The Lord's blessed. This union already. Today we just make it official." Outside, wagon wheels creaked as more townspeople arrived. Children darted between adults' legs, scattering flower petals. The morning sun streamed through windows, catching dust motes in bars of light that fell across freshly swept floors. When Leo took his place at the altar, his height seemed less intimidating than usual, softened by joy and nervous anticipation. The church filled quickly, with even those who had once mocked now sitting respectfully in their Sunday best. The first notes of the wedding hymn rose from the small organ. All heads turned as Mia appeared in the doorway, radiant in a simple white gown that the townswomen had lovingly sewn. She moved with grace despite her height, carrying a bouquet of prairie wildflowers. Gasps rippled through the congregation, but this time they were sounds of wonder, not ridicule. Standing together before Pastor Green, Leo and Mia created a striking image, two souls matched in both stature and spirit. Their hands joined, strong fingers intertwining with certainty. The pastor's words rang clear through the hushed church as he spoke of love, faith, and God's perfect timing. When they exchanged vows, their voices carried to the rafters, firm and sure. Leo's deep tone trembled slightly with emotion, while Mia's clear words rang with quiet joy. Pastor Green's final pronouncement, husband and wife, was nearly lost in the surge of cheers that filled the small church. The celebration spilled into the churchyard, where fiddle music soon had couples spinning across the grass. Leo and Mia's first dance drew all eyes, their movements surprisingly graceful despite their size. Other couples joined them, creating circles of motion and laughter beneath the afternoon sun. Even the most hardened skeptics found themselves nodding in approval. The sight of the giant couple, now dancing with orphan children, turned the last whispers of judgment to respect. Women who had helped sew Mia's dress wiped happy tears, while men who had once jeered now raised glasses in honest tribute. As twilight softened the sky, lanterns began to glow like earthbound stars. Leo drew Mia close during a quiet moment between dances, his voice soft against her ear. "God gave me more than a bride," he whispered. "He gave me my equal in spirit." Mia's smile caught the lantern light, tears glistening in her eyes as she squeezed his hand in response. Around them, the celebration continued warm and bright, hymns and laughter rising into the gathering night. The church windows glowed with welcome, casting long rectangles of light across the yard, where children still scattered flower petals and couples still danced. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows as Leo and Mia McGraw crossed their threshold as husband and wife. The familiar creaks of floorboards now held new meaning, each step marking the beginning of their shared life. Mia's hands moved surely as she kneaded dough at the kitchen table, humming softly while the yeasty smell of rising bread filled their home. In the workshop behind the house, Leo's saw rasped steadily through oak planks. His large hands shaped the wood with careful precision, crafting a new rocking chair sized perfectly for Mia. He positioned it beside his mother's old rocker, the two chairs standing like sentinels before the hearth, a symbol of past and present, of heritage and hope joined together. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they walked the fence line hand in hand. Their matching strides covered the distance easily while they spoke of dreams, of children's laughter someday filling the quiet rooms, of little ones gathered from the orphanage to make their family complete. When dusk painted the sky in purple and gold, they lit the oil lamp together. Its warm glow filled the cabin as they knelt side by side on the wooden floor. Their prayers rose in tandem, giving thanks for the trials overcome and the peace now found. The Lord's deliverance through their struggles drew grateful tears from both giants' eyes. Steam rose from the iron pot on the stove as their supper simmered. Leo's voice was soft but sure as he gathered Mia close. "Guess the Lord knew I needed a bride bigger than my fears." Mia smiled, resting her head against his broad shoulder. "And I needed a husband bigger than my doubts." Beyond their windows, coyotes called across the darkening prairie. But within the cabin's warm circle of lamplight, peace reigned complete. Their home glowed like a beacon on the endless plains. Two hearts united not by stature, but by grace divine. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.